Hey guys, Chaosmatic here. It's story time. What would you do if everything you spent years building disappeared in a matter of months? The last person I expected to destroy my life was the man I called my brother. If you had met me in 2019, you probably would have thought I had it all figured out. I wasn't rich, I didn't drive a luxury car, I didn't own a massive house or take expensive vacations every year, but I was genuinely happy, and looking back now, I realize that's something many people spend their entire lives chasing. My name is Daniel Carter, and at 38 years old, I had built a life that felt stable and meaningful. I lived with my wife, Emily, and our two children in a quiet suburb outside Chicago. Our home wasn't fancy, but it was filled with laughter, and to me, that mattered more than anything money could buy. Most mornings started the same way. I'd wake up before everyone else, make coffee, and enjoy a few peaceful minutes before the house came alive. Soon enough, I'd hear footsteps racing down the hallway, followed by my son asking what was for breakfast and my daughter arguing that she should get the bigger pancake. Emily would walk into the kitchen shaking her head and laughing. "Every morning," she'd say, "and every morning they think it's a life or death situation," I'd reply. Those small moments were my favorite. After breakfast, I'd head to work at a manufacturing company where I had spent more than a decade building my career. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to support my family comfortably. More importantly, it gave me a sense of purpose. I enjoyed the people I worked with and took pride in providing for the people I loved. Life had a rhythm to it. Work during the week, family dinners in the evening, little league games on weekends, barbecues with neighbors during the summer, movie nights every Friday. It wasn't exciting by social media standards, but it was real, and it was enough. One of the biggest parts of my life was my best friend, Marcus. Marcus and I had known each other since college. Over the years, we'd gone from classmates to roommates to practically family. He had stood beside me on my wedding day as my best man, and I had done the same for him years earlier. There wasn't much we didn't know about each other. If I needed help moving furniture, Marcus was there. If he needed advice, he'd call me. When my father had surgery, Marcus checked in every day. When his business struggled, I spent countless evenings helping him figure out solutions. People often joke that we were more like brothers than friends. Honestly, they weren't wrong. Marcus came over so often that my kids considered him part of the family. Emily always welcomed him warmly, and our family spent countless holidays, birthdays, and weekends together. At the time, seeing my wife and best friend get along so well felt like a blessing. I never imagined it could become something else. As 2019 moved along, everything seemed to be heading in the right direction. Our savings account was growing steadily. We were discussing a family vacation for the following summer. Emily and I occasionally talked about updating the kitchen. The kids were healthy and doing well in school. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. I remember standing in my backyard one evening while the sun was setting. The kids were playing tag, Emily was laughing at something Marcus had said, and I found myself thinking how lucky I was. Life wasn't perfect, but it was pretty close. What I didn't know was that within a year, almost everything I was looking at would be gone, and it would all begin with news reports about a virus that seemed very far away. At first, everyone thought the pandemic would be a temporary inconvenience. That's what I told myself anyway. When I started hearing about a virus spreading across the world in early 2020, I didn't think it would change my life. Like most people, I assumed things would slow down for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, and then everything would return to normal. I remember sitting on my couch one evening watching the news while Emily was preparing dinner. "They're shutting down some businesses," she said. I looked over at the television and shrugged. "It'll probably be over soon." Those words feel strange to remember now, because I had no idea how wrong I was. Within weeks, the world around me started changing. The office that was always full of conversations became almost empty. Meetings that used to happen face-to-face moved online. People who had worked there for years suddenly disappeared from the company directory. Everyone was nervous, everyone was uncertain, but I still believed I would be okay. I had experience. I had worked hard for over a decade, I had a good reputation. I thought that if anything happened, I would find another opportunity quickly. Then one morning, I received a message from my manager asking me to join a video call. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was another company update. Maybe some changes, maybe some temporary adjustments. But when I joined the call, I immediately noticed something was different. My manager wasn't smiling, the HR representative was there, and neither of them looked comfortable. My stomach tightened. "Daniel, I want you to know this isn't because of your performance." Those words are never a good sign. I stared at the screen, waiting for the rest. the explanation, the reason, the part where they told me everything would be fine. Instead, I heard the words that would change my life. Due to the financial impact of the pandemic, we're reducing our workforce. For a few seconds, I didn't say anything. I just sat there, trying to process it. After 12 years of loyalty, after countless late nights and weekends spent making sure my work was done, I was suddenly just another name on a list. My position was gone, my income was gone, my sense of security was gone. The call ended after a few minutes. I remember staring at my reflection on the black screen after the meeting closed. I looked the same face, same room, same house, but something felt different. It felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. I didn't tell Emily immediately. I sat alone in my car outside our house for almost half an hour. I didn't know how to walk inside and tell my wife that the future we had planned was suddenly uncertain. When I finally entered, Emily immediately noticed something was wrong. "Daniel, what happened?" I tried to smile, but she knew me too well. "I lost my job." The look on her face changed instantly. Not disappointment, not anger, fear, the same fear I was feeling. But then she walked toward me and hugged me. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. And for a while, I believed we would, because we had prepared for emergencies. We weren't living paycheck to paycheck. We had savings, almost $80,000 sitting in our account. At the time, that amount made me feel safe. I thought it gave us time. I thought it gave me room to breathe. I started searching for jobs immediately. Every morning, I woke up early, updated my resume, searched through job boards, and sent applications. Dozens of them, then hundreds. I spent hours writing cover letters and preparing for interviews, but the world had changed. Companies weren't hiring like before. People with years of experience were competing for entry-level positions. Jobs disappeared within hours of being posted. Weeks passed, then months, and every rejection email felt heavier than the one before. Unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with another candidate. I saw that sentence so many times that eventually I stopped feeling surprised. I started questioning myself. Was I not good enough? Had I become replaceable? Was everything I had built actually that fragile? Meanwhile, our savings slowly started disappearing. At first, we weren't worried. We still went grocery shopping normally. We still paid our bills. We still tried to maintain some sense of normal life for the kids. But every month, I noticed the number in our bank account getting smaller. 80,000 became 60, 60 became 40, 40 became 20. And suddenly, the money that once represented security started feeling like a countdown. Every expense became a calculation. Do we really need this? Can we wait? Should we cancel that? I hated feeling that way. I had always been the person who provided, the person who solved problems, the person my family could depend on. But now, I felt like I was watching my own life from the outside, unable to control what was happening. The hardest part wasn't even losing the job. It was losing the confidence that came with it. Before the pandemic, I woke up every morning knowing my purpose. I was a husband, a father, a provider, a professional. But slowly, I felt like I was becoming someone else. Someone who spent his days refreshing job websites. Someone who worried about every bill. Someone who couldn't answer his children's questions about the future because he didn't know the answer himself. One evening, my son walked into my office while I was applying for another job. "Dad, when are you going back to work?" I forced a smile. "Soon, buddy." He nodded and walked away. But after he left, I sat there staring at the screen, feeling a pain I couldn't explain. Because I wasn't just fighting to get a paycheck. I was fighting to get back the person I used to be. And I didn't know it yet, but the pandemic wasn't finished taking things away from me. At first, I kept telling myself that things would get better. Every morning, I treated job hunting like a full-time job. I woke up early, put on a clean shirt, sat at my desk, and sent applications for hours. I wanted to believe that if I worked hard enough, eventually someone would give me a chance. But as the months passed, that belief became harder to hold on to. The rejection emails kept coming. Some companies never responded at all. Others would interview me 2 or 3 times before choosing someone else. Each rejection felt personal, even when I knew it probably wasn't. The worst part was that I couldn't point to a specific mistake. I wasn't failing because I lacked experience. I wasn't failing because I wasn't qualified. The world had simply changed, and thousands of people were fighting for the same opportunities. Meanwhile, our savings continued to shrink. Every month felt like watching sand slip through my fingers. The account that once made me feel secure now filled me with anxiety every time I opened it. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table staring at our finances while Emily washed dishes nearby. "We've spent nearly half of it," I said quietly. She stopped for a moment. "We still have enough. For now." Neither of us said anything after that. The silence felt heavier than an argument. As the financial pressure grew, small changes started appearing in our lives. We canceled our family vacation. We stopped eating out. Streaming subscriptions disappeared one by one. The kitchen renovation we had talked about was forgotten completely. Even grocery shopping felt different. Instead of buying what we wanted, we bought what we could justify. I hated every second of it, not because of the money itself, because I felt like I was failing my family. Before the pandemic, I had always been the person who solved problems. Now I was becoming the problem. At least that's how it felt. The stress followed me everywhere. I couldn't enjoy movie nights. I couldn't relax during dinner. Even when I was playing with the kids, part of my mind was calculating bills and worrying about the future. Emily noticed. Of course she did. She knew me better than anyone. One night after the kids were asleep, she sat beside me on the couch. "You've changed." I looked away. "What do you mean?" "You don't laugh anymore." Her words hit harder than I expected, because she was right. The cheerful guy I used to be was slowly disappearing, and I didn't know how to bring him back. At the same time, Emily seemed different too. Not dramatically, just small things. She spent more time on her phone. She seemed distracted during conversations. Sometimes I'd ask her a question and realize she hadn't heard a word I'd said. I assumed she was stressed too. After all, the pandemic wasn't just affecting me, it was affecting everyone. But there were moments that felt strange, moments I couldn't quite explain. Around that time, Marcus started coming over more often. At first I appreciated it. Honestly, I needed a friend. Some days he was the only person who checked on me. He'd bring coffee, help around the house, or sit with me in the backyard while we talked about everything happening in the world. "Things will turn around," he told me one afternoon. "You always figure things out." I wanted to believe him, and because he was Marcus, I trusted him. What I didn't realize was that he seemed to visit more often when I wasn't paying attention. Sometimes I'd come back from running errands and find him already there. Other times, Emily would casually mention that Marcus had stopped by earlier. Again, I thought nothing of it. Why would I? He was my best friend, she was my wife. Suspicion never even crossed my mind. The person I was suspicious of was myself, because despite all my efforts, I still couldn't find stable work. The longer I remained unemployed, the worse I felt. I started sleeping less. Some nights I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling until 3 or 4 in the morning. My mind replayed every rejection, every bill, every worry, every possible disaster. I stopped exercising, I gained weight, I became irritable. Little things that never used to bother me suddenly triggered arguments. One evening, Emily bought something online that cost less than $50. Normally, I wouldn't have cared. That night, I exploded. "Do we really need that right now?" The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Her face fell. "It was for the kids." "I know." "Then why are you acting like I bought a sports car?" I didn't have an answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't angry about the purchase. I was angry at my situation, and she happened to be standing closest to the explosion. The arguments became more frequent after that. Not huge fights, just constant tension. Small disagreements that never seemed to go away. The warmth that once filled our home was slowly being replaced by stress. And while I was busy worrying about money, jobs, and saving my family from financial disaster, I completely missed the warning signs that something far worse was already happening right in front of me. The collapse of my finances wasn't the real problem. It was only distracting me from the collapse of everything else. By the beginning of 2021, I felt like I was living on autopilot. Every day looked almost identical. Wake up, check job listings, send applications, attend interviews when I was lucky enough to get one, worry about money, go to bed, repeat. The routine was exhausting, but it gave me something to focus on. As long as I was chasing solutions, I didn't have to fully face how much my life had changed. Then, unexpectedly, things started looking slightly better. A former coworker reached out and told me about a temporary contract position. The pay was lower than what I used to earn, and the benefits weren't great, but I didn't care. After months of unemployment, it felt like someone had finally thrown me a lifeline. I accepted immediately. The first paycheck wasn't huge, but I remember staring at it and feeling a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time in months, I thought maybe the worst was behind us. Maybe we had survived the storm. Maybe life was finally moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, life had other plans. Because while I was focused on rebuilding our finances, there was something happening inside my own home that I never saw coming. Looking back, the signs were there. There were late-night text messages, phone calls that suddenly ended when I entered the room, moments when Emily seemed emotionally distant. But every suspicious detail had a reasonable explanation. At least that's what I told myself. After all, we were both under enormous stress. The pandemic had tested everyone. The last thing I wanted was to become a paranoid husband inventing problems that didn't exist, so I ignored my instincts, again and again. One Saturday afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. A meeting had been canceled, and I decided to surprise the family with lunch. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Marcus's truck parked outside. That wasn't unusual. He visited often. But when I walked through the front door, the house felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. Emily? No answer. Kids? Nothing. I set the food on the counter and walked upstairs. Halfway down the hallway, I heard voices coming from the bedroom. Marcus and Emily, they were talking. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but I remember noticing how quickly the conversation stopped when my footsteps got closer. A few seconds later, Marcus opened the door. His expression looked normal. Maybe a little surprised, but normal. "Oh, hey," he said. "Didn't know you'd be home. Meeting got canceled." "Gotcha." Emily appeared behind him. She looked slightly flustered, only for a moment. Then she smiled. "We were just organizing some old boxes." At the time, I accepted the explanation, but something about that moment stayed with me. Not because of what happened, because of how it felt. For the first time in years, I experienced something I couldn't explain. Tiny voice in the back of my mind whispering that something wasn't right. I tried to ignore it. For weeks. Maybe months. But once suspicion enters your mind, it changes the way you see everything. Small details start standing out. Conversations feel different, behavior feels different, and eventually you begin noticing things you once overlooked. Then came the day that changed everything. I was working from home on a project when my printer stopped connecting to my laptop. Emily's laptop was sitting nearby, so I decided to use it instead. I wasn't snooping, I wasn't looking for secrets. I simply needed to print a document, that's all. As the computer started up, a message notification appeared in the corner of the screen. Normally, I would have ignored it, but one sentence caught my attention immediately. "I miss you already." The sender's name was Marcus. My stomach dropped. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen, trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe there was context I couldn't see. Then another message appeared. "I wish we didn't have to keep pretending." The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter. My hands started shaking. I clicked on the conversation, and my world shattered. Months of messages, hundreds of them. Some emotional, some romantic, some impossible to misunderstand. There were conversations about secret meetings, conversations about me, conversations about how difficult it was to keep their relationship hidden. I kept scrolling, and every message felt like another knife. The dates made everything worse, because this wasn't something recent. It had been happening for months, while I was searching for jobs, while I was worrying about our mortgage, while I was lying awake wondering how to save our future. The two people I trusted most had been building a secret life behind my back. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just sat there staring at the screen. Every memory suddenly felt contaminated. Family dinners, barbecues, birthday parties, holiday gatherings. How many times had they looked at each other while I stood there completely unaware? How many times had they lied to my face? How many times had I thanked Marcus for being such a supportive friend while he was secretly betraying me? I don't know how long I sat there. 10 minutes, maybe 30. Time stopped making sense. Eventually, I heard the front door open downstairs. Emily was home. For a brief moment, I considered closing the laptop and pretending I hadn't seen anything, pretending my life wasn't falling apart. But that moment passed quickly, because some truths are impossible to unsee. I heard her footsteps coming toward the room. Then she walked through the doorway. The second she saw the laptop open in front of me, the color drained from her face. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The look in her eyes told me everything. She knew, I knew, and in that silent moment, 11 years of marriage began collapsing around us. But as devastating as that discovery was, I still didn't know the full truth, because the affair was only the first betrayal. The second one would cost me far more than my marriage. I wish I could tell you that I handled the discovery with dignity. I didn't. The moment Emily realized I had seen the messages, the room exploded into chaos. "What is this?" I demanded, turning the laptop toward her. She looked at the screen and immediately began crying. "Daniel, please, how long?" She didn't answer. "How long?" I shouted again. My voice was so loud that even I barely recognized it. For a moment, she just stood there. Then she whispered the words that broke whatever remained of my heart. "Almost a year. A year. Nearly a year of lies. Nearly a year of pretending. Nearly a year of looking me in the eyes every single day while hiding the truth." I felt physically sick. The room started spinning. I sat down because I honestly thought my legs might give out beneath me. Why? It was the only question I could manage. Why? Why after 11 years? Why after everything we had built together? Why with Marcus? Of all people, why him? Emily cried as she tried to explain. She talked about stress, about loneliness, about how the pandemic changed everything, about feeling disconnected, but honestly, I barely heard any of it. My mind was stuck on one thought: Marcus, my best friend, the man I had trusted like family, the man who sat in my backyard and told me everything would be okay, the man who shook my hand, hugged me, and looked me straight in the eyes while secretly sleeping with my wife. That night was one of the longest nights of my life. There was no screaming after the initial confrontation, no dramatic scene from a movie, just pain. Raw, overwhelming pain. Over the next several days, more truths began surfacing. Every conversation revealed another lie. Every answer created new questions. And the deeper I dug, the worse things became. Then something happened that changed everything. A week after discovering the affair, I sat down to review our finances. At that point, I was trying to understand exactly where we stood financially before making decisions about the future. The marriage was hanging by a thread. My trust was gone. I needed clarity. As I reviewed bank statements, several transactions caught my attention. I had noticed some of them before, back when I dismissed them as household expenses. Only now they looked different. There were transfers, withdrawals, payments that didn't make sense. Some were small enough to go unnoticed. A few $100s here, a few hundred there. Others were larger, thousands. I started comparing dates, then comparing account activity, then comparing messages I had discovered on the laptop. The pattern slowly emerged, and when it did, I felt a chill run through my entire body. The money wasn't disappearing randomly. It was going somewhere. Specifically, it was going to Marcus. At first, I couldn't believe it. I convinced myself there had to be another explanation. A loan. A favor. Something innocent. Then I found messages discussing the transfers. Messages that neither of them expected me to see. My hands were shaking as I read them, because suddenly the affair wasn't the only betrayal. It wasn't even the worst betrayal. While I was unemployed and desperately trying to protect my family's future, money had been quietly leaving our accounts. Money from the savings I had spent years building. Money meant for mortgage payments. Money meant for our children. Money meant to help us survive one of the hardest periods of our lives. Some of it had gone toward helping Marcus pay off personal debts. Some of it had funded trips and expenses related to their relationship. And some of it had simply disappeared. I sat there staring at the screen in disbelief. Then another horrifying realization hit me. Marcus hadn't just been stealing money. He had been manipulating me. The signs suddenly became obvious. Whenever I talked about investments, he always encouraged me to move money around. Whenever I worried about finances, he somehow knew details I never remembered telling him. Whenever Emily wanted access to certain accounts or financial decisions, Marcus always seemed supportive of the idea. Individually, none of those moments looked suspicious. Together, they painted a completely different picture. For months, maybe longer, the two people closest to me had been working together while I remained completely unaware. I remembered every conversation where Marcus pretended to care. Every time he brought coffee over, every reassuring speech, every promise that things would get better. The worst part wasn't losing the money. The worst part was realizing that many of those acts of kindness were built on deception. The friend I thought was helping me survive wasn't helping me at all. He was benefiting from my collapse. I finally called him. For several seconds after he answered, neither of us spoke. Then I asked one question. "How much did you take?" Silence. That silence told me everything. "Daniel? No. Tell me the truth." His voice sounded nervous for the first time in years. "It wasn't like that." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the situation had become so unbelievable that laughing felt easier than crying. "It wasn't like that," I said. "You slept with my wife, stole money from my family, and lied to me for months. How exactly was it?" He didn't have an answer. Neither of them did. Over the following weeks, more evidence emerged. More lies, more financial records, more secrets. Every discovery confirmed the same reality. The people I trusted most had systematically betrayed me during the darkest period of my life. By the time the truth was fully exposed, my marriage was effectively over. My friendship was gone forever. A large portion of my savings had vanished. And for the first time since the pandemic began, I stopped asking how things could get worse, because I finally understood the truth. They already had. What I didn't realize was that I was about to hit the lowest point of my entire life, and strangely enough, that's exactly where my recovery would begin. People often say that betrayal changes you. They're right. What they don't tell you is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. It creeps into every part of your life until one day you wake up and barely recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. After the affair and financial betrayal came to light, my marriage unraveled quickly. There wasn't much left to save. The trust was gone. The respect was gone, and without those things, the relationship felt like a house whose foundation had completely collapsed. Emily and I tried having difficult conversations. We tried discussing the future. We tried talking about the children. But every conversation eventually returned to the same place: the lies, the secrets, the betrayal. Eventually, we agreed to separate. Even saying those words felt surreal. For more than a decade, Emily had been part of every major memory in my adult life. We had built a home together, raised children together, made plans for the future together. Now we were discussing lawyers, paperwork, and custody arrangements. I never imagined my life would end up there. The divorce process wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was exhausting. Every document felt like another reminder that the life I thought was permanent had disappeared. Every signature felt like a small funeral. Friends who once filled our weekends suddenly stopped calling. Some didn't know what to say, others didn't want to get involved. A few quietly chose sides. The social circle that had once felt so strong began shrinking faster than I expected. And Marcus? He vanished. After our final confrontation, he stopped reaching out completely. No apology. No attempt to make things right. Nothing. Years of friendship ended with silence. For a long time, that silence hurt more than anger would have, because at least anger would have shown that he cared. Silence suggested he didn't. As the months passed, loneliness became my constant companion. The house felt different. Too quiet, too empty. On the days when the kids weren't with me, the silence became almost unbearable. I would walk through rooms filled with memories and feel like a stranger in my own home. Sometimes I'd sit at the kitchen table for hours without realizing how much time had passed. Other times I'd drive around aimlessly just to avoid being alone with my thoughts. The depression hit harder than I expected. I stopped taking care of myself. I stopped exercising. I barely slept. Some nights I'd lie awake replaying every decision I had made over the previous 2 years, every warning sign I missed, every lie I believed, every moment I trusted the wrong people. The questions never stopped. How could I have been so blind? How did I miss something that had been happening right in front of me? Was any of it real? The emotional damage was overwhelming. But financially, things weren't much better. The pandemic had already drained a huge portion of my savings. The divorce created additional expenses. The money that had disappeared through Marcus and Emily's deception was gone for good. And while I had managed to secure temporary work, it wasn't enough to rebuild what had been lost. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely defeated. Not stressed, not worried, defeated. I remember one specific evening sitting alone in my living room. The lights were off, the television wasn't on, the house was completely silent. I looked around and realized that almost everything I had spent years building was gone. My marriage, my best friend, my financial security, my confidence, even my sense of identity, I had hit rock bottom. And the frightening part was that I couldn't see a way back up. But life has a strange way of changing when you least expect it. Because just when I was convinced there was nothing left to lose, an opportunity appeared from the most unlikely place imaginable. And that small opportunity would end up changing everything. When you're at rock bottom, something interesting happens. The things that once seemed risky stop feeling scary. Not because you've become brave, because you feel like you have nothing left to lose. That's exactly where I found myself. I wasn't dreaming about becoming wealthy. I wasn't trying to build some massive company. At that point, I simply wanted stability. I wanted to pay my bills without feeling sick every time I checked my bank account. I wanted to stop wondering whether my life would ever recover. The opportunity arrived through someone I almost ignored, a neighbor named Rick. Rick lived a few houses down and owned a small home maintenance business. Nothing glamorous. He handled repairs, pressure washing, gutter cleaning, minor renovations, and general property maintenance. One afternoon, he knocked on my door. "Hey, Daniel." "Hey. You busy tomorrow?" I laughed. "That's a dangerous question these days." He smiled. "I need an extra pair of hands for a job. Nothing complicated." The pay wasn't amazing, but it was work, so I said yes. The next morning, I showed up expecting a long day and sore muscles. What I didn't expect was how much I enjoyed it. There was something satisfying about seeing immediate results. You completed a task. The customer was happy. You got paid. Simple. No endless interviews. No waiting months for responses. No corporate uncertainty. Just work. Over the next few weeks, Rick called me several more times. Then several more after that. Before long, I was helping him almost every week. One day, while we were loading equipment into his truck, he looked at me and said something that stuck with me. "You know, you're pretty good with customers." I shrugged. "I've always been a people person. Most people think this business is about fixing things." He shook his head. "It isn't. It's about trust." That word hit differently. Trust. After everything that had happened, it wasn't a word I thought about often anymore. But Rick was right. Customers weren't just paying for repairs. They were paying for reliability, for honesty, for someone who would show up when they said they would. A few months later, Rick became overloaded with work. Demand had exploded. People were spending more time at home and investing money into their properties. One evening, he called me. "I've got more jobs than I can handle." "Sounds like a good problem." "It is." He paused. "Why don't you take some of them?" At first, I thought he was joking. Me? Running jobs on my own? I hadn't owned a business before. I barely felt capable of managing my own life, but the idea stayed in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I already knew the work. I enjoyed interacting with customers. And perhaps most importantly, I was tired of waiting for someone else to save me. Maybe it was time to save myself. I used a small portion of my remaining money to buy basic equipment. Nothing fancy, just enough to get started. Then I created a simple online page advertising pressure washing, gutter cleaning, and small home maintenance services. I expected the phone to remain silent. Instead, something surprising happened. People called, not hundreds, not dozens, just enough. One customer became 3, 3 became 10, 10 became 20. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. More importantly, every satisfied customer led to another referral. For the first time in years, I felt momentum moving in the right direction. I started waking up with purpose again. The depression didn't disappear overnight, neither did the pain, but every completed job gave me a small piece of confidence back. Every positive review reminded me that I still had value. Every dollar earned felt different because I had built it myself. The biggest surprise wasn't the money. It was who I became. The man who had spent years depending on employers, relationships, and circumstances was slowly being replaced by someone more resilient. Someone who understood that life could collapse without warning. Someone who knew he could survive it. Within 18 months, the side hustle was no longer a side hustle. I hired my first employee, then a second, then a third. The business that began with a borrowed opportunity and a few pieces of equipment was growing faster than I ever imagined. For the first time since the pandemic started, I could see a future again. But the most rewarding part wasn't the success. It was knowing that everything I was building now belonged to me. No lies, no betrayal, no false promises, just honest work and a second chance. And soon, life would give me something even more valuable than financial recovery. It would finally give me closure. Success didn't arrive in a single moment. There wasn't a dramatic day where I suddenly became wealthy and all my problems disappeared. Real life doesn't work that way. Instead, it happened gradually. 1 good month became 3. 3 good months became a year. The business continued growing through referrals, repeat customers, and word of mouth. People appreciated honesty, they appreciated reliability. And after everything I had experienced, I made it a personal rule that every customer would be treated with the respect I wished others had shown me. By the 3rd year, the company was earning more than I had ever made at my old job. That realization felt surreal. There had been a time when I couldn't sleep because I was terrified of losing everything. Now I was employing people, supporting families, and building something that no layoff could take away from me. But surprisingly, the financial success wasn't the most important part. The most important part was what happened inside me. The anger started fading. The resentment started fading. The constant questions finally became quieter. For years, I had obsessed over the betrayal. Why did they do it? Why wasn't I enough? What could I have done differently? Eventually, I realized those questions were keeping me trapped in a chapter of my life that had already ended. The truth was simple. Some people betray you because of who they are, not because of who you are. And understanding that changed everything. As for Emily, our relationship eventually became civil. Not close, not friendly, but respectful enough to co-parent effectively. The children deserved that much. The marriage was over, but our responsibility as parents wasn't. Marcus, however, experienced a very different outcome. Over time, many people learned what had happened. The affair, the lies, the money, the manipulation. Trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to rebuild. The same people who once admired him gradually distanced themselves. Business opportunities disappeared, friendships faded, relationships became strained. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't need revenge anymore. Life had already delivered its own consequences, and strangely enough, that felt more satisfying than any confrontation ever could. One afternoon, several years after everything happened, I was sitting in my backyard watching my kids laugh while chasing each other across the grass. The scene reminded me of another evening long ago, back in 2019, before the pandemic, before the betrayal, before the collapse. For a moment, I thought about everything I had lost. Then I thought about everything I had gained: strength, wisdom, perspective, a business, a new future. Most importantly, I had gained proof that a person can survive far more than they think. If someone had told me during my darkest days that I would one day feel peace again, I wouldn't have believed them. Yet there I was. Not because life became perfect, because I learned how to rebuild after it stopped being perfect. And before I end this story, I want to speak directly to you. Maybe you're watching this while going through your own difficult season. Maybe you've lost a job. Maybe someone betrayed your trust. Maybe you're struggling financially. Maybe you're sitting in the dark wondering how you'll make it through another week. If that's you, I want you to remember something. The chapter you're living right now is not the entire book. Pain feels permanent when you're inside it. Failure feels permanent when you're experiencing it. Heartbreak feels permanent when it's fresh. But permanent and painful are not the same thing. Sometimes the people you trust will disappoint you. Sometimes life will knock you down without warning. Sometimes you'll lose things you worked years to build. But as long as you're still breathing, your story isn't finished. The moral of this story is simple. Don't let betrayal turn you into a victim for the rest of your life. Don't let failure convince you that you're finished. And don't let a bad chapter make you forget that another chapter is still waiting to be written. The pandemic took my job, my wife took my trust, my best friend took my loyalty, but none of them were able to take my future. Because in the end, the most powerful thing a person can do isn't avoid being broken, it's choosing to rebuild anyway. And sometimes the life you build after everything falls apart becomes stronger than the one you lost in the first place. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay strong, and remember to like, share, and subscribe for such amazing stories.